sometimes books work for my brain at certain times. And I think I was just really ready to read a book about the instability of what we think of as the present and what we think of as the future because it feels so unstable. And I don't think you can believe anything that the narrator tells us. Like, this entire book is about how all of these historical figures they get could change time. The main character can actually see beyond herself and her own like obsession and fantasy with like this Kate and Leopold fanfic she's having with this man, and I think it's distracting because the book focuses from her perspective on these things, but I think that's kind of the point.
Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and it is The Stacks Book Club Day. It's our first one of 2025, and I am so excited to be discussing The Ministry of Time by debut author Kaliane Bradley with our returning guest, Jay Wortham. This sci-fi speculative romance time travel novel follows a covert government agency working behind the scenes to prevent changes to history, exploring the complexities of memory, time, and identity along the way. Today, Jay and I give you a spoiler-filled conversation about personal responsibility, colonialism, and the legacies that this book attempts to interrogate. As a reminder, there will be spoilers on today's episode, so make sure you've read the book before you listen. And listen all the way to the end of today's episode to find out what our February book club pick will be. Everything we talk about on each episode of The Stacks can be found in the link in the show notes. Listen, if you love this podcast and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/The Stacks and join the Stacks Pack. You get a bunch of perks like bonus episodes, access to the Discord, the mega reading challenge. And if you join before January 31st, you can get access to my amazing reading spreadsheet tracker and a shout out on this podcast. That's right. The shout out perk, which we've had since 2018, is going away for good. So if you join before January 31st, you get to hear me read your name. Head to patreon.com/The Stacks to earn that special limited edition perk. Shout out to some of our newest members of the Stacks Pack: Daniel DeJesus, Jennifer Booth, Brittany C., Jonathan Lasher, Hannah Stern, Rachel Rooney, Tiffany Eastham, Carol, Anne, Matthew Barge, Maris Adams, Angie N. Murphy, and Amy Johns. Thank you all so much for joining the Stacks Pack, and thank you to every single member. All right, now it's time for my conversation with Jay Wortham about The Ministry of Time. All right, everybody, it's the Stacks Book Club Day. I'm so excited I get to welcome back Jay Wortham to the Stacks. Jay, welcome back.
Hi.
We're talking about the book that you picked. Okay, so people who are mad, you can just email jay@ihatethisbook.com. The book is The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley. For those of you who are listening who have not read the book, it is important that you know there will be spoilers on today's episode. It is also important that you know, if you want to listen to a conversation that is spoiler-free about this book, I talked to Kaliane Bradley about the book, absolutely zero spoilers, 2 weeks ago. So you can go back and listen to that if you want a spoiler-free moment until you finish the book. That being said, we are going to spoil the shit out of this book. So that is your warning. I know Jay famously doesn't care about spoilers. I am a person who does care about spoilers. So proceed at your own risk. Okay. We always start here for book club. Generally, what did you think of the book?
I enjoyed it. That's why I picked it. It really, it itched all the right parts of my brain.
What did it itch? What worked for you? What stands out to you as like the biggest, like, yes for you?
The themes of the book are really compelling to me. I read this, I reread it for our book club, but the first time I read this book, I should say it took me a few tries to get into the book. So I really do understand people who have a hard time with this book. Since we talked, I didn't realize this book was so controversial and so polarizing. So I kind of went on a deep dive to read what other people had to say about it in various corners of the internet. But this book was highly, highly, highly recommended to me by one of my favorite Smarties in my life, Hafiza Geter, who is an actual brilliant genius. And so I read it to appease her, and we have the best book chats. So I was like, well, yeah, if you love this book, I want to talk to you about it. And it took me a while to get into it. But then once I did, I was like, oh, this is a book about the tally of complacency about the long-ranging impacts of oppression and white supremacy and the way it can kind of wind itself into all of us, even in ways we don't even know. And it is supposed to be this kind of steamy, time-jumping kind of spy thriller, but I really, 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 really see it as a book, I guess what I want to say is I really, really see it as a cautionary tale about the toll and the high cost from generations, 7 behind and 7 forward, however you want to think about it, but just through past, present, and the future of not being self-aware and being seduced by the power and promise of empire, which is what I think happens to our main character. Like, she never really escapes that trap.
No, she does not. Okay, I will share my original thoughts, and then I want to just sort of dive right in. So I was very bored by this book. I thought it was very slow. I kept waiting for things to happen. I was just like, where is this going? I kept thinking, why does Jay love this book? Right? Like,
I loved it. I really enjoyed it.
Well, but why? Like, why did Jay want to pick this book? Like, why? I kept thinking about the book in the context. Why is this book on Obama's list? Why? Like all of these things. I felt like this was a book that had a really great idea, great topics for discussion, but I felt as an actual piece of writing, it fell very flat for me. Like, it was a little all over the place.
Yes,
there were too many elements that I didn't feel like were fleshed out well. Is it a romance? Is it a spy thriller? Is it actually doing both of those things? Is it doing neither of those things? I had a lot of that sort of like, what is the book trying to do, and what is the book actually doing? And so I felt very frustrated as a reader. And then when the things finally start to happen in the last 80 pages, I was so frustrated and bored that I was like, I don't care. Sure, whatever. Whatever you say, great. Oh. You're Adela. Congratulations. Everybody wins. So I think it was a very frustrating reading experience for me. After I finished the book, I reached out to a lot of different people who I know who read the book and loved it and asked them why they loved it so much. And those are a lot of the things that I actually had already taken notes that I wanted to talk about. So I do think that the ideas in the book were good. And my sense is a lot of people who liked the book liked what it made them think about, not necessarily what was actually written on the page. Like, they liked what jumped off for them in the idea of the book more than the actual characters or the actual plot lines. And before I should have done this at the beginning, but I always forget. Before we actually dived in, The Ministry of Time. Let me give you a quick plot thing for those of you who don't care about spoilers. This is a book about an unnamed narrator who works for the Ministry of Time, which is a department of the government in the UK. And they are attempting to bring back people from different time periods through time travel. And each person that comes back, each time traveler, they call them expats. There's 5 in this book. Each expat is paired with a modern day person from the ministry. Our narrator is partnered with a guy named Graham Gore, who's an Arctic explorer who died in an Arctic expedition, but is brought back to the 21st century. I think it's supposed to be modern, I think, or current. And they sort of then have to do things and be together. But that's sort of the premise. I just want to set it up. That's sort of the premise of the book. Okay. That being said, let's just start with the time travel.
Sure.
The conceit of the time travel. One of the rules of the book, though Kaliane Bradley tells us very specifically early in the book, don't worry about all the time travel stuff. But then at the end of the book, it's like, this is a detail about time travel you need to understand. And I was like, I wasn't worrying about any of this. I don't know where we are. But the conceit is that they're dead already. So if they bring them back, it doesn't fuck up the future or the past or anything, because it's like the moment of the person's death, the time travelers come and pick them up.
But that's also, I think that, okay, here's what I want to say. Okay. I really hear you on the things about this book that are frustrating, and I hear you about the pacing. It worked for my brain. I think it took me a few tries to get into it. I don't exactly know. I would actually love if there was like a reading study, like a sleep study I could do in my brain, so I could figure out why some books work for me and why some books don't. I haven't really been able to read all 4s. The pacing and the writing of the book there are some parts of it I've really enjoyed, but like it doesn't work for me right now. So I'll come back to
Yeah.
it. So it's like, it's just sometimes books work for my brain at certain times. And I think I was just really ready to read a book about the instability of what we think of as the present and what we think of as the future because it feels so unstable. And I don't think you can believe anything that the narrator tells us. Like we
right.
know that's not true. Like this entire book is about how all of these historical figures they get could change time. And Adela comes back in time. I mean, I don't know if this is too layered. You can tell me if I need to explain this out more, but the main character is moving through one timeline with a boss who's actually traveled back in time. And it's another version of her to make sure that history plays out in the same way, except it doesn't at all because the interactions that the main character has with Gore are very different from the ones that have already preceded her existence.
Right.
So,
right.
I mean, there's a character in the book called Smelia, who I really, really wish we knew more about. I think I'm saying her name right, Smelia. Yes. And she's the main character's counterpart. So they're both what they call bridges. They're meant to manage these expats. They also call them refugees, which is like, I thought like very cheeky government speak for like permissible people, displaced people. I mean, I just thought the book had a funny sense of humor. And it's to me, okay, wait, let me slow down. I'll just save that point for another moment.
Okay.
But so anyway, so the main character's counterpart at work is a woman named Smelia, and they have a very kind of tense friendship. Smelia is a Black woman, a Black British woman. The main character is biracial. She's Cambodian and English, and she has a very complicated relationship to it. She thinks she's white passing. It's not really clear if she is, but that's how she perceives herself. And she doesn't really want to be aligned with her coworker. She's uncomfortable with her Blackness, not because Smelia is Black, but because she's very much embedded in her racial identity in a way that the main character just doesn't want to be, right? There are all these examples where she's like, angry because her sister writes an article about them enduring microaggressions growing up. She's just like, these things don't matter. When she meets the Commander Gore, she's like, I was wired to love him, which I always read as like, I was wired to fall in love with this like vestigial remnant of like empire and colonialism, even though she's like critiquing him on it. And she's like, oh, you can't say Negro. And like, this was actually, you encountered enslaved people and like didn't do anything. And like, that's fucked up. And, but she's like politically aware, but she's not aware of how much she's a function of the system. But anyway, so Semelia's character gets radicalized also because as the book evolves, you realize that many people are coming back through time, not just the ones that the government extracts. And all of their actions get influenced by what all of these people from different moments in the past and the present and the future are telling each other. So the book's like, history works this way. Like once these people are brought back in time, they cannot affect history anymore. And it's like, well, that's not true because we find out immediately that the reason the expats are so important is because of the roles they play in the present to affect the future. And they need them to try to, I mean, the government, the main character is telling us, well, the government is using this time door, which is how they kind of talk about it, to stop climate change. I keep saying that. Well, they're trying to stop climate change. Well, they're trying to stop war. Well, and it's like, is any of that true? Like, is
any of it true?
It just feels like watching the notes or reading the notes from watching the highlights or reading the notes from inauguration and just being like, well, you say you're going to do this, but like, what are you really going to do? Like, she's just repeating party lines over and over again. So I think for me, like the first time I read the book, it was also destabilizing. And some of the language in the beginning is so overdone. And it's like, what's actually happening? And it is this romance, but like, what's actually going on though? And I think, again, I just think you're really meant to see that this woman is like missing the plot. Like the book, and maybe it's also a dexterity thing because I think this is a debut novel. And so maybe this is a skill that gets refined with time. I had patience for it, but I thought it was just a really deft device. Like, the main character can actually see beyond herself and her own like obsession and fantasy with like this Kate and Leopold fanfic she's having with this man, and she keeps being like, these things are above my pay grade. I'm getting paid too much to care about this stuff. And it's just all about her negligence, even though she's the daughter of a woman whose people were horribly abused by dictators and a country with too much power, and then just, abused by the country that she was displaced into, she still is kind of just like, well, the government's doing what the government does, you know? And it's like, babe, like, wake up, sheeple, like time to get up and get radicalized, but she never does. And I think it's distracting because the book focuses from her perspective on these things, but I think that's kind of the point.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think she can't see outside of herself enough to really be like, for my reading, to be like a good enough guide in this book that is like really complicated technically. So it just feels very destabilizing because I'm like, wait, what's going on? Who's this? Like, wait, why are we talking about how hot Graham is right now? Like, aren't we trying to save the world, girl? Like, ew. And he smokes so much.
Yeah.
And I know he stinks. Like this
smelly.
is like such a small thing, but like I couldn't get into the romance part because I was like, it smells there. It smells bad. He's smoking everywhere. Let me ask you this. I want to talk a little bit about what I am calling the sort of Hamilton effect in this book. Because based on the conversation I had with Kaliane and also just my sense of reading of this book, we are supposed to root for the expats. Right? We're supposed to like want them to get away safely, to pull one over on the government. They are these displaced people. Like we're supposed to be cheering for them. But of course, in the context of this book, they're all white people from different historical eras in British colonial conquest and like major times of Britishness. And the two people who are like the most against them or like the most in control of them are two women of color, right? Like they're the ones that are like, you need to do this or you need to do that. You know, Semelia ends up being our mole. She's sort of the bad guy in the context of keep Graham safe. And I find this to be really interesting because it reminds me so much of Hamilton, where we are looking at Black and brown bodies performing the characters of white men who historically, in actual fact and history, were the people who enslaved the ancestors of the Black and brown men who are on the stage performing the show. And so it's this sort of like trick of colonialism, this book, that like we're rooting for the bad guys if the idea of the book is like colonizing people from a different time period or whatever is bad. We're still rooting for the white people in the story. We're not really rooting for our narrator at a certain point. We're sort of like, girl, what are you doing? And we're definitely not rooting for Semelia, even though I think I was.
She's the hero of the book.
She's really the hero to me, but I don't know that like if you're rooting for Graham that you feel that way. If you're rooting for the expats to like be safe, she is in that version of the book, the bad guy.
Yeah. No,
I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
That's a real read. I mean, I didn't root for the expats. And so I'm just thinking about that if my brain missed something. Or I was really charmed by, you know, the kind of like Encino Man of it all in the middle part when like they're getting used to modern life. Like
yes, that was my favorite part of the book.
It's great. It's so funny.
And the three of them and like the one expat I was rooting for is of course the one that dies. The soldier
Arthur,
from I liked him. I was
Maggie
rooting for him.
Too.
I liked Maggie too, right. But like so we are sort of rooting for these people.
Well, I guess I'm rooting for them because they all, I forget what Maggie's role is, but they all don't have the same point of origin necessarily. Like Graham and there's another commander who are both like commanding officers who did fucked up things in history to varying degrees. And I feel like Arthur and Maggie didn't. I want to say that I think one also has to read this book with a British sensibility. So I'm thinking about shows like What We Do in the Shadows and Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, and very much like, if that rings a bell for anybody, but like a very much Channel 4, like the IT Crowd, like a very kind of sardonic view of like government culture, right? So I think that's part of it. Like I had that in the back of my mind. Like this is sort of cheeky and it's funny and like it's kind of supposed to be very silly in some ways. I also think that what I was really struck by when I read it again was how Graham's character, it becomes, he has the same experience as the people that he encounters in his life.
Right.
Like, yes, he is a white cis, as far as we know, relatively heterosexual. There's some implications that he's bisexual or pansexual in the book, but they don't use that language because it's not his language. But he does imply about intimacies with other men, which is really lovely. But, he is displaced, right? Like, he's not allowed to travel. Like, they don't know the impact of time travel on him. It turns out is really bad for most people's bodies. They can't withstand it. So it's kind of a miracle that the four of them are pretty intact, except for when Arthur dies. But like, they are okay for the most part, but pretty much everyone else who's time traveling is not okay. So we don't know what actually happens to them, how deleterious it is over time. But I just was sort of struck by how, he talks about his experiences of like taking a port in like what we would now consider the modern Middle East, or these expeditions in the Arctic he's doing, where he's trying to like find new routes, and like, people are dying and he has to deal with their families and their the people that are left behind. Like, he's encountering indigenous people in these places and they're dying. And he doesn't see that as the same vein as what's being done to him. But as the reader, I think you kind of do. So there's a little bit of, for me, there's a little bit of satisfaction about like, he is valuable, but he is experiencing some version of what he's done to others. Because, they catch him in like this still net and like it hurts and he's not allowed to leave the house. And I don't know, it's pretty mild compared to what he is complacent to or witness to or adjacent to in his time. But I don't know. I kind of felt like it just felt like this reminder that like even the people in power are still subject to the whims, the colonial empiristic whims. I don't know. I hear what you mean about Hamilton, though.
I think you're right. Like that is one of the messages of the book. I guess my question, or my pushback to that is, well, then who is responsible if the people who are literally going out and colonizing places aren't responsible for it? Like, is it just the people at the top? Can we only blame the kings and queens, or like?
No, Graham's definitely responsible. I was not implying he isn't.
No, I mean, but like that he's at the whims of like someone above him, like that there's always someone above you that like you're at the whims of, even if you're complacent, that like he's also, like that's sort of how I was reading it, is like what she was saying was like, Graham's actually a really nice guy and he's doing the best he can given his station in life, and like that this is like his job and this is who he is. And my response to that is sort of like, okay, but like he did choose to be an Arctic explorer. Like he did choose to be a literal colonizer. Like his actual job is like to go out and be like, I stamp ye in the name of Victoria or whatever the hell. So I don't know, like
her perspective is not to be trusted. Like she is not to be trusted. And I think she sees it that way because that's how she views herself. I mean, I think the book comes down to questions of personal responsibility and what you do with the information that you have. And I watched the new season of Severance last night, or the first episode of the new seasons of Severance last night. And I don't know if anybody's watching that, or, I don't want to get too far into a tangent, but the second season kicks off with these workers who have all agreed to have an implant in their mind that severs their memories of them when they're not at work. So it's this really interesting show about like, are you someone else if you can't remember like this kind of waking life that you have? And at the end of the first season, they have a little bit of awakening. I won't spoil Severance because that's actually a show that I wouldn't want spoiled for me.
Okay. Thank you, because I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, yeah. But they have a little bit of an awakening around some of the ethical and moral dilemmas that come up with like when a big company is in control of your consciousness in a sense, right? And the next season starts out with them sort of trying to figure out how to, I think, maybe try to effectively press for change. And I do think there are some similar themes, right? Like, and these are the questions that so many of us can ask ourselves and need to be asking ourselves, and that we've been asking ourselves since watching the decimation of Palestine, watching Trump take office again for a second time. It's like, are you really not culpable or capable of damage if you aren't, quote, doing anything wrong, or if you are, quote, a good person? And I think that we're all implicated. And I just like that the book, I'm sort of a time travel nerd. I don't mind when it doesn't make sense. Like I kind of enjoy to me, it worked enough. I think that there were still some questions about place and time, you know, and I
Yes.
think the book is this like weird Mobius strip because it's written a lot in the past tense, like someone's really reflecting on their experiences and what they've kind of come to realize. And I think the book is a really regretful book about someone who really fucked up, really fucked up, and is
Do you feel
trying to
like
make it
she
right.
knows that she fucked up? Like, do you feel like that is clear that the main character feels that way? Because there's parts where it feels like she does, but then there's also parts for me where she feels so confused about what's
She
happened
really
that I'm
is.
like, wait, do you feel bad, or are you
I
also
know.
trying to figure this out?
Oh my God. There's so many points in the book when everyone's just like, you are not smart. Like they're just like, you are such a disappointment. And like Adela keeps looking at her and being like, I knew when I was your age, I was naive, but I didn't know I was dumb too. Like she's just sort of like, and it's also interesting because one of the paradoxes that come up is that they actually aren't the same person. They're in different timelines. And so then I appreciate the book doesn't try to get into the like multiverse because I'm like, Marvel has made me so like just like saturated on that conversation. But, you know, they aren't the same person. And so it does sort of raise this, I think, place for possibility and optimism. That's like, well, the present is always changing. The future is always malleable. Like things are never set in stone because even what this older woman has experienced in her timeline has now been altered 20 years later in this other timeline. So, you know, anything is possible at any given moment. But I don't think she really ever figures it out. That's why I think the book is actually a tragedy. And I think it's a cautionary tale. And I think, you know, it's not a hopeful book necessarily.
That's okay. So I want to tell you this. When I talked to Kaliane Bradley, I asked her, what's one thing you hope people will keep in mind? And she was like, that it's a hopeful book.
Hopeful about what?
She just said that it was like hopeful and like to bring joy, I believe. I can't remember the exact answer, but that was like the final word she left us on, basically. Was that like this, in her mind, this is a hopeful book. I think for me, what's very interesting is that I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about what Kaliane Bradley did as a writer versus what I feel like is actually happening on the page and the relationship with the actual story to my brain. Like I felt like a lot of times I was thinking like, oh, the writer's doing this versus like the book is doing this.
I see.
Which was...
Do you remember any examples? Like, you know.
Yes. So like, I think the writer was writing about mixed race identity and like wanted to talk about that. But I felt like what was actually on the page about mixed race identity was extremely boring and bland and like very flat to me. And I felt like I could feel the writer being like, I'm mixed race. So like, I want to explore this, but also not actually having anything super interesting to say about it. That's like the main one because I'm mixed. And so I'm always curious about how other mixed people experience it or like want to write about it. And I felt like some of that was like really flat for me. I think a lot of the like romance stuff, I definitely felt like, oh, this is not our narrator. Like this is Kaliane, because also part of the story of this book, of the backstory, which I knew before I even spoke to her, was that during COVID, she became obsessed with Graham Gore. And so this started as like fan fiction that she would write to her friends that she made who were into Arctic exploration, which I didn't know that was a thing you could be into, but I learned so much. And that she would send this book, versions of this book, stories from this book to her Arctic explorer friends.
Oh, interesting.
And so like, and she just had like a big crush on Graham Gore, and all of her friends had different Arctic explorers they were into. And so that part felt different to me in reading it so I read the book, I had flag notes, then I researched the book, then I spoke to her. So like there were moments in the book where I was like, this is weird. Like, why is she like his dimples? I'm like, this is like such a, you know, like it was just felt like slightly off to me. And so I think that was also some of the struggle I had with the book was like, who's taught, like, is this supposed to be the character? Is this the author? Like, I don't know. So those two things definitely pop out to me. I also think like the like Hamilton effect part for me, I could feel her hand in some of that. Or I felt like I could feel her hand. I can't say if that actually was, like I can't exactly say what it was because I didn't ask her about that. But but it just felt like it sort of took me out of it a little bit, if that makes sense.
I think that all those critiques are extraordinarily valid. I mean, I just read with a lot less. If I'm reading for pleasure, I'm not, I have to say, like, I don't always have that radar so attuned, because I feel like I have a lot of grace for first time novelists. I have a lot of grace for fiction where the ideas are interesting to me. I just read Jacqueline Halpern's I Who Have Never Known Men, and it's a book where like truly nothing happens in that book, and I was riveted. Like I was like, you know what I mean, like paging through it, like what's gonna happen, and like nothing ever happens, and it's like I didn't care. I was like, great, you know. And it's not, you know, it didn't really get at much about like gender or identity or really even that much about community. And I was just like, I don't care. Like this book worked for me. I mean, I didn't love the book, but it was great. Like I really enjoyed reading it. But wait, okay, so I'm still thinking about this Hamilton effect, and I had this tab open in my brain from the moment you brought it up. And I think what I want to say is, in the logic of this universe, and I do think we're in a little bit of the slightly near future. Like I think it's a little bit in the future. There are some hints that we're a few years into the future.
But we know that some that Adela is like from 2040. So
we know Adela's from 2040, right?
Future.
Right, and then the brigade and Sal,
or the 2400s or 2200s.
Yeah, and they're like, oh no, shit has hit the fan. But even in Adela's timeline, she's from 2040. She's just like, oh, this era is so decadent. She's like, you guys, you're about to have your first resource war. You have no idea how bad it's going to get. She's like, I didn't remember it being this lush, but she's just like, oh my God, like you have it so good. You know, it's really interesting. She's like, food rationing's not fun. You know, like she's really giving this sense of how quickly shit's about to hit the fan. But I feel like, okay, in the logic of whatever the ministry is, they would go get all white people. And it's kind of implied that the two people that they decide to prioritize are the like people with the most military experience and like the people who kind of take to the field work. And then the people that they discard are the queer people and the people who it's kind of chilling where they're like, well, they're like, yeah, they're not really like, you know, because they're finally in a time where they can express themselves and like enjoy the world and enjoy literature and film. And anyway, so I thought that was kind of interesting. But the logic of the ministry would be that we would have these women of color who are minders of these war generals, essentially, and they would be men. Like I thought also the events were a little arbitrary. That was the only thing for me that kind of the logic that stuck my brain, which is I was like, why these four people? Like why? Like, and also how do they figure out? Like it's not clear to me like how you set time on the time door. Like I just didn't realize it had that much control. Like I thought it was really interesting, but whatever. But I do think that, I don't know, like I do, the Hamilton effect is real because I have a lot of complicated feelings about that production, which I had to wait for like 5 years to talk about because people loved it so much. And I'm not by trait like an outward hater. Like I can be, but it's not my MO. I'm like, oh, everybody loves that thing. I'll wait. Like even Drake, I was like, I'm a Scorpio. So I'm like, I'm willing to bide my time. Like there will be a moment to talk about Drake. And when it comes, guests will be ready. Yeah. But I was able to wait until now. I mean, maybe some of the discrepancies that you're feeling are also an indicator of the author who I don't know and haven't read any interviews with or any, I mean, I'll listen to the one that you all did. Or did you record it or?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll listen to it. Great. So I'll listen to the feed. But maybe she's also a little complicated about her mixed race identity and she doesn't know what she wants to say. I mean, I thought that you could really feel that in how Somalia wasn't really fleshed out. Like I don't even have a mental picture of what she looks like or what her voice is like or anything about her. Like the descriptions of her weren't really that rich, which is always a tragedy when there's a Black woman in a work of fiction about, you know, and she doesn't really, but I also kind of chalk that up to like the main character not really being able to see her as a person because she can't really even understand herself as a person.
Right. Right.
But maybe that's too generous. I don't know.
I know you're such a generous. I'm literally sitting here being like, Jay's such a generous reader. But let's take a quick break and we'll come right back. Valentine's Day is upon us and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh. Of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. Okay, we're back. I want to talk about, this is like maybe one of the most important sort of pieces of the book, story-wise, if you're worried about timelines, which is the 9/11, Auschwitz, Hiroshima, turning on a dime, changes the fate of Graham, of our narrator, of Adela, of everything. So what happens in the book is that we find out that like Adela, I think this actually comes after what I'm talking about, but we find out that Adela has come back in time to like fix things loosely. Things are bad. She's come back to sort of like sort it out. She's married to Graham. They have a child named Arthur after the Arthur who died. She becomes the boss of Adela, unnamed Adela, youthful Adela. And as they're talking about something that happened. And she's like, I told him about Auschwitz. Or she's like, oh, I told him about a thing. And she's like, oh yeah, 9/11. She's like, no, I told him about Auschwitz. And she's like, oh, okay. Then we find out later that will alter the path of Graham Gore.
Right.
And he will become a different person because 9/11 sort of militarized, radicalized him. And what we find out now is that Auschwitz sort of off the grid, like he wants to escape, go off the grid to Alaska. But we also are told that it could have been like, there's also a reference of like Hiroshima as the other thing that could have been a turning point for him. And so my question to you is, one, what do you think Graham Gore becomes if she tells him about Hiroshima? And then two is, do you think that finding out about Auschwitz would actually have a huge different impact on Graham Gore?
How believable is that? Well, my understanding is that, and also like the fact that Adela is like, wait, not 9/11, and the main character still doesn't realize that Adela's traveled through time. I'm just sort of like, listen, I live in the future. If someone comes to me and is like, time travel is possible, my first question is going to be, are you from the future?
How do you know?
How do you know?
Specifics. Is it you?
Can you take me back 1 hour in time to prove it? Like,
prove it.
I'm just like, where are the critical thinking skills here, girly? But anyway, so like there's so many moments like that. And I feel like Adela, like there's the fight scene too. And Adelia is like, show me what you've learned. I want to make sure your tactical skills are up to date. And she keeps like dropping all these hints and she just like never gets it. Anyway, it's like, and Adelia just gets more and more like disappointed and like punching her because she's just sort of like, wake up. But anyway.
She's like, you are the worst version of me.
How
am I this?
I'm so embarrassed by myself. Okay, so my understanding of that interaction is that Graham Gore hears about 9/11 and he, immediately starts working for the government. He's like in this other timeline and he's like, oh my God, I've been, like I'm really terrified. I want to protect people. Like I believe in government. We've got to do it. He hears about World War II and he's like, no, like how could the government let this go on? Like I no longer believe in the vision and the force of ministry, like or whatever. Like it really repels him. I think it's a really interesting idea, right? Like I think that Graham is being asked in a contemporary sense to reckon with his actions in a completely different time. And I think part of it is meeting Somalia and being like, you're the descendant of these people that I encountered who were enslaved. There's a moment where he describes encountering a slave ship and being asked to count the people in the hold and taking note of their condition, understanding what's going to happen to them, feeling really uncomfortable, but he does nothing. And he just does the job that he's there to do. And he's like, it's really, something. And then after he meets Smelia, they all go out for drinks and he spends some time with her. And he's like, how do you think she would see me if she knew I had experienced this? It's like there are these moments where he's really grappling with like the long-standing legacy of the actions that, even if they're not his alone, that he takes part in. I mean, I think this book really would have really benefited from like a multiple narrator perspective.
Yeah.
Like, I think it would have been really fun. Throughout the book, there are these historical flashbacks where you kind of find out what happened with Graham's expedition, which I didn't really find that interesting. I found myself skipping past them.
So bored. I'm glad they were short.
They were short. And at first I read them, but I was like, they're not actually providing any clues about his experience. And it would have been great to have like, been like doing a ride along with Maggie as she's having her like, lesbian adventures in like contemporary London, or like Arthur and his longing, or just like Grant, like what's he thinking about? So I do think it's possible, but I don't think the book earns it. Like, I don't think they earn that explanation. I think what's more compelling to me is her betrayal of him. So at the end of the book, shit starts going sideways. There's a mole in the company that's been leaking information. They think it's one person who gets assassinated. They find out it's Smelia. And they're just like, shit is hitting the fan, basically. And the expats escape and they go to this tunnel that they've been scouting out. And she's like, I have to tell you something, that there are these trackers embedded in you. We need to get them out. And Graham is just looking at her like, you idiot, again. Like, well, we're already in the hiding place. So like, what is taking them out now going to do? So he agrees, they take him out. But then she further betrays them and she calls in for reinforcements. And she's like, they're all here, because she's still like, they'll be safer. This
is the moment for me where I'm just like, girl.
Yeah. Well, she still doesn't get it.
You?
Yeah, she still doesn't get it.
Dumb. I'm like, get it. We need a slightly smarter protagonist so that I can go along with you. She was so dumb that I was like, girl, stop.
Well, here's my counter to that, though, which I'll get to in one moment, which is okay. But in the moment when she, the double betrayal of that moment of both not telling Graham about the tracker and then also giving up their coordinates, I think that is really the moment where he's like, none of you can be trusted. Not my lover, not the government. Like, I can't believe anything. He's also been working more with the government. He's privy to stuff that even she may not know about. Yeah. And we find out from Adela that the Graham in her timeline is also like a more ruthless Graham. And Adela at the end of the book is like, burn it all down. Here are the passcodes. None of this is working. Just like, like abort. Because she even comes back to be like, I want to make sure I just don't want my friends to get killed. Like we're supposed to think Adela is this like wizened version, but she's actually there in a very self-serving mission. She's like, I just don't want anybody else to die. And it's like, what? And Somalia's like, sub-Saharan Africa's underwater. It's like, future Adela is still only concerned with her immediate world. So it does kind of track for me that like Graham has these series of awakenings that lead him to kind of completely abandon ship. But I will say this. I also recently read the book of the Unnamed Midwife, which I don't know if you've read, but it's like it's like I've been reading all these dystopian books. I mean, this is also a dystopian book, but I've been reading all these futuristic dystopian novels for research for something else. And it's been really interesting to think about how people categorize and document fictionalized narratives of how we would respond to catastrophe. And for the most part, in my experience of reading a book like Station 11 or I Who've Known Men Who've Never Known Men, the book of the Unnamed Midwife, all of the protagonists and narratives of those books are just like incredibly self-sustaining, incredibly smart, incredibly wise. They make all the right decisions, which is why they're still here to tell the tale. And they kind of look upon people who don't make good decisions and they kind of record their stories. And it's just like, to be honest, if things really go down, like, it's going to be really hard to get it right. Like, I probably won't make it. And I feel pretty prepared, but I probably won't make it. Yeah. And I probably won't make the right decisions. So I think I also kind of appreciated that. Yeah. It's hard to prioritize the collective over the individual. And it comes up again and again in the book.
That's why I was so taken. I read The Handmaid's Tale for the first time last year.
Ooh,
And I was so taken by that book because I had seen the show, at least the first season. I don't know. I always stop things after a little bit. So I saw some of the show. But what I was taken about in the book that I don't think gets talked about enough is that Offred, the like main character, she is not a radical. She is not leading a resistance. She is taking butter for lotion. Like that's her resistance, right?
That's right.
She goes along with everything. And I find that to be a really compelling dystopian story. And I know people often compare Margaret Atwood and Octavia Butler and Parable of the Sower and The Handmaid's Tale. But what I find so interesting about both of them, and I think tracks in both of them, is that this white woman in The Handmaid's Tale is very much going along to save herself, to hopefully make it out, to tell the tale. And I think in Parable of the Sower, we have this young Black girl who's like very idealistic, who is like this smart leader. And that is refreshing for the reader in a way that reading a white woman who just like goes along to get along is very accurate in The Handmaid's Tale. And so I do appreciate sort of like these different perspectives of like how would you respond? Because everyone likes to think they would be a Lauren in The Parable of the Sower, but I think most of us would be an Offred or a Adela or whatever, or young unnamed narrator. So I always appreciate when it's like a dystopian thing and the main character is actually just like not a revolutionary or like not the smartest person in the room, because I do think that is often what happens, which sort of takes me back to this thing about like, does learning about Auschwitz actually change Graham Gore? And my thinking is like, okay, maybe, yes. But the other version, the more like realistic version to me is like, no. Like a lot of people were cool with what the Nazis did enough. They were cool enough with it. A lot of Americans were, a lot of British people were. I think, in retrospect, 80 years later, 90 years later, there's a different narrative. But what happened in the Holocaust happened because most people were like, yeah, we're fine with it. So this idea that like Graham, who we know works for Empire, who we know follows along in the footsteps of the British government, would have this huge awakening. It would fundamentally change who he is and change the course of history. While that's a lovely idea, I also could see a version where he still works for the ministry. He still
definitely
supports the government. Like that's who he is through and through to his core. We see that's who he is in his original time. We see that's who he is in Adela's timeline. And the idea that like unnamed narrator would change that, or that this one piece of information would change that so deeply feels a little bit like a reach to me.
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
But I understand it in the context of the book. But that is the thing I thought of like, oh, do we actually think like we literally just had Elon Musk doing a fucking Nazi salute in 2024 on stage at the inaugurational address party or whatever the fuck. So like this idea that now that everybody knows about the Nazis, they're going to change who they are just doesn't feel historical to me in any way, especially a straight-ish white guy who works for the government.
And maybe that's the hopeful part of the book, that despite these timelines that he could change. Because you're right. I mean, I think that there's more evidence to support your theory in the world that we're grounded in, that he might be completely disaffected, or he might be like, he might come up with some excuse to justify it. But the notion that he has the capacity for empathy and moral righteousness is maybe supposed to be hopeful. But if that's the case, then I do think the book kind of tilts into an interesting kind of white savior model that is not that helpful. Like I would much rather have Semelia. I love her kind of parting speech when she's just like, there will be more and more and more of us. I mean, that's what I found to be hopeful in the book. It's like that there is this kind of way in which people abandon the safety of the promises of government as security. And, we are going through this moment as it's a nonpartisan, policy, or it's just like a nonpartisan awakening of how much we cannot trust our government, and that is just becoming so apparent. I mean, it's been for so many of us for so many years, but it's just becoming like a pretty universal thing in a way that I find really interesting. And I think that's also true in the book, especially the British government. Like, come on, y'all.
Yeah. But I definitely find that ending for Semelia to be probably the most hopeful part of the book.
It's satisfying too.
I also like I had so many questions about like what was going on in the future. Cause there's
Me
like so many
too.
people when they talk about Adela, they're like, do you know who she is? Like, and I'm like, is she Hitler? Like, how bad is she?
Is
Like,
she?
I wanted to know who she had become. I so desperately wanted to go forward in time.
Me too.
Because
Me
I
too.
so desperately,
good.
I wanted to know what 2400s was like. I wanted to know what Adela was like.
Yeah.
How bad was Graham? Like, I just wanted more. I think overall, like, I know we're at the end of the conversation. Overall, my biggest takeaway is like, there were so many things I wanted more information on in this book.
Yeah.
And I got too much of all the things I really didn't care about.
Yeah.
Like, I really
Yeah.
didn't care about Little Cat. And I really didn't care about, like, once the twist in the book happened, I was like, okay, I'm now interested. I wish this came 200 pages ago. Because I am interested in time travel, and I am interested in these ideas of like what happens and who do we become given where we are now-ish. And that was really frustrating for me of like, take me to Somalia. Like, let's go with her. Like, what does she know? What did the Brigadier and Celeste or whatever tell her?
That was the part. That was the part too at the end. I totally agree. Like, I wish the second part of the book had just been exploded into like 200 more pages and like lose a lot of the romance stuff didn't bother me, but I would have read another 200 pages just to understand like what is actually happening, because it's so condensed. And then you realize like, oh wow, like it's not just Adela or whoever else Gore decides to send back in time that's got the capacity to change the future. Like, other people are using these tools and this technology to change the future, which is so fun. And I'm like, okay, now this is the thriller. Yeah. This is the tenet of it all, which is a movie that many people hate, but I really enjoy. So I should have said at the beginning, that's very revealing for me as well. But so like, what did they tell her? And also, can they be trusted? Can any of them be trusted?
That's the other question.
And that's the question. Like, how do you know what you know? The last thing I'll say is that I wanted to come up with like a reading and watching list for this book, because it is.
I love that.
I recognize that it is very controversial and people don't like it. And so I wanted to be like, in case you don't want to read this book or DNF, you didn't finish it, here are other books, I think, books and works of art and films and shows and, albums that I think explore these themes. But that Brit Marlin movie, The Sound of My Voice, which is also about someone who comes back from the future, telling of climate change and catastrophe, and they want to enact these big radical moves. And, this woman that's working with her is all of a sudden like, well, can I trust her? Like, how do I know that she's really from the future? And it's so interesting because like, what's the proof? Yeah. What is the proof? So, and it's also a very seductive idea to think about that we can change the future, that things aren't predetermined. And maybe that's also what I find kind of hopeful. But I really, really, I think the thing for me I keep coming back to is just like the heartbreaking question at the center of this book, which is like, what would you do if you found out you were aiding and abetting a government organization that was going to take down the world? And also, what if all of us are doing that right now? Yeah. I mean, like we all use Facebook. We all use Meta. We all use Amazon. We're aiding and abetting Elon. We use X. Like, how do we think about that? And it's like, well, I'm just posting. I'm just doing this. Well, when you're Googling, an AI response is coming up and that's depriving the world. It's enabling these pyroecologies. I mean, we are all complacent. Yeah. And what are we doing about it?
I think, Jay, if the book did more of that, I would have loved it. Like, I love all these ideas. I love all these questions. I do want to ask you, I want to end on this note. Okay. So this book was on Barack Obama's famous reading lists. It was on his summer list in 2024. Mm-hmm. And I want you to sort of just do a thought experiment. What do you think Barack Obama liked about this book?
Let me ask you a question, though, to start. Do we think he really makes these lists?
So I firmly believe that he reads the books on the lists, because I think it's such an unforced error to publicly post this like information that nobody actually asked you to do year after year if you're not reading them. Because like, what if somebody comes up to you and is like, so Adela, Ministry of Time, and you're gonna be like, what? Like that would be such an embarrassing for no reason thing. So
Obama doesn't get embarrassed by that. He just smiles and laughs and moves on.
But then why make the list if you're not going to like, it's just like no other president's doing it. It's not like, oh, this is a tradition of a book list from like George Washington. It's like Obama was like, hey, this is what I'm reading. And it picked up. So I do believe he reads them. I think he probably gets advice from other people. I think there's probably people who are like, you should read this. Like you don't have any romance on your list, like add this in. But I think if he puts it on the list, he's at least read it and enjoyed it. I don't know. I'm just like, I was thinking like, why would Obama like this book? And the one thing that I was thinking is like, he is hopeful that we will have we have the ability to recontextualize history and like have generous readings of history because he's done not great things.
Yeah.
Like that it might like change his legacy, or like that in 150 years if someone time traveled back to his time, like there might be a more generous reading of him.
Sure. I mean, that's a very generous reading of maybe his like
you've
his
inspired
own
me,
reading
Jay.
habits. I feel like what he probably was drawn to, as well as the things you've mentioned, but I think he might have liked the dad jokes. There are a lot of dad jokes in the book. Like when the main character introduces Graham to Spotify and he's just like mind blown, and then he hears one song and then she's like, should I play it again? And he's like, that would be disrespectful. And it's just like so funny. And then there's another part when he's like talking about TV and he's like, what are these horrendous dioramas of people doing wretched things? And she's like, no one's forcing you to watch EastEnders, which is like a trashy show. And he's like, don't talk to me like that. You know, it's like stupid. Like, I feel like that is the stuff Obama. I could see him laughing out loud at these little like bantery jokes about an old guy who's, you know what I mean? It's like, he probably grew up loving Splash, or, you know, he probably watched Frosty or like movies like that about like a person who had to acclimate to modern times. He was like, LOL. That's what I think.
I like it. Last one. What do you make of the title and the cover?
Well, you know, there's this whole controversy right now. I just Googled and kind of read about it, where there's like a Spanish language book or show that's very similar. So I'm still like kind of parsing my way through that, because I do think people can have simultaneously really good ideas at the same, you know what I mean, that don't involve plagiarism. So I don't know exactly the details of it. It seems really unfortunate. But I thought that the cover, I mean, it feels like it's designed by the same person who did Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. It just gives the same sort of, but, you know, it wouldn't have grabbed me, to be honest.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel indicative of the book, but I don't think book covers do that anymore. Like they don't really tell you what the book's about anymore.
Yeah, I think that's true sometimes. I think for me, the title is quite grabby, The Ministry of Time. I'm curious about that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great title. I think the cover design is pretty lackluster to me. I mean, I think you can see the like 2 or 3 different shadows of the same. Like I think it's like supposed to be giving us like different parallel, whatever.
Oh, smart.
But I don't think this cover does much to tell you what's in the book. And I think, you know, I think some covers really can and do, but I think some don't. I think that's just like designer stuff.
It also might work better in the UK, right? Because like if this book was called The Department of Time, we might immediately be like, oh, that's weird. You know, but like like we don't call our branches of government, or like, I don't know, we just don't call them ministries. So I think it's a little bit, it was lost on me, I'll say. Okay. And then I got it. I was like, oh, okay. But wait, Tracy, like what's the last book you read that you loved?
I love the book, the fiction or nonfiction?
Well, I'd love to hear both.
Okay. Well, I loved James. I loved Martyr. I loved Colored Television by Dancy Senna. I loved Come and Get It by Kylie Reed. These are all books from last year. Nonfiction last year, I just loved the book about the Challenger disaster by Adam Higginbotham, the guy who wrote the Midnight in Chernobyl that became the Chernobyl TV show.
Okay.
He wrote a book about Challenger disaster. That was my favorite book I read last year.
I'll read that.
It's so good. It's very Patrick Radden Keefian in style.
Okay.
So those are all books I've loved recently. New books.
Okay, that's helpful. Just
why do you want to know?
Because I do think that books like Dishes, like Amaro, like, you know, Bitters, like they're really specific to a palette. So I think maybe, I've never really done a book club before, but I do think it's really helpful to sort of get a sense of like, here are the books that work for me, here's the book that don't work for me, to see if that person's pick is going to work for you. That's
Yes.
my last thing. Yeah. Because I don't really recommend books to people because I'm just like, I don't think I know what you're going to like. Unless I know the person very well or have a very specific sense of what they want to read. I'm like, I don't know, because my brain's different. My brain is real weird.
No, I think that's right. I think recommending books is definitely like a skill, and like it's hard to do, and you have to like really be able to understand the person that you're talking to.
Yeah.
And I think what's been fun for me about the show and the book club here is that I often let the guest sort of pick because I want them to be excited and want to talk about it. And I'll read anything. The only rule I always tell people is it just has to be something you're willing to talk about critically, and you won't feel like it can't be your friend's book because then you're going to be defending it, and you're going to be like, oh, and I'm going to say I didn't like this, and then you're going to be like, well, I think what they were trying to do.
Yeah, of course.
And I've had that happen. That's a rule that I had to put in place after a few different times. And that's really it. Because it's my job to read. So I'll read anything. And I also think it like helps me to refine my palate to know what I do and don't like. But I do think it's different when it's not your job to read a new book every month and talk about it. But this is definitely outside of my comfort zone of reading, like time travel. Even though I did love Station 11, and I did love.
That's a perfect book. Station 11. I'm sorry, Station 11 is a perfect book.
And I read it in 2018. And
nothing she's written before or after has come close. So we have to also acknowledge that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I read it before COVID. And so I had so many romantic feelings about it that I think are different now. Like all the Shakespeare stuff and like how they held on to Shakespeare. Like I love Shakespeare so much. Just like this. And like there was, I can't remember the exact detail. Something about the toilet, like how they got the toilets to flush or something that I was just like, this is so good. But that book took me 2 or 3 starts to actually get into.
Because the beginning about Arthur Leander, I was like, no. But that's a book I've probably read at least 10 times. Now I'm rereading it right now. That's a book that I read. I like, it is a book. I'm like, the structure is incredible. The pacing, once you get into it, the pacing's incredible. The way that Clark's character, who's one of the he's one of the characters who's like living at the airport, the way he kind of imagines the end of the world. I mean, it's so poetic, like Miranda's whole journey, which you kind of can do without Miranda's perspective, but it's so interesting. That's a perfect book in my opinion. So
yeah, I think that's right. I think like because I'm new to sci-fi, future dystopia stuff, I really like it when it's really good. But if it's just mid, it's very hard for me.
Well, I'm reading, I know we're over time, but I'll just say that I'm reading a lot of dystopic novels right now because I'm thinking a lot about survivalism, and I'm thinking a lot about how people prepare for the future and how we imagine the future. And I'm really interested in kind of if we're obsessed with the apocalypse and like in a way that prevents us from understanding that we're already in it and that many people in current timelines are already experiencing apocalypse. Like LA is experiencing an apocalypse right now.
I mean, I'm here. I'm
You're
living
there.
it. Yeah.
So
I think that's right. You know what's funny? I am not a person who plans in this way. I've had so many people recently be like, are we moving countries? Like, what's the plan? I don't have the plan. I don't know. I could never be a doomsday prepper. There's too many things you could possibly plan for. Like, I don't have that impulse that some people have. I'm never like, okay, if X happens, we do this. I'm just like, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah. But which is probably a fine response, right? Like you'll
But
adapt.
I won't be ready. Everyone else will have bought all the water and the toilet paper, and I will be drinking like days old, milk, and I'll be wiping my butt with leaves. Like I will not be ready for whatever apocalypse comes because I just don't believe it's coming. I'm like, yeah, well, I guess if it burns down, it burns down. And I don't know if that's like cultural. My mother is Jewish. My father is a descendant of slaves. Like, I don't know if that's like we've lived through sort of the worst and we're still here. And so maybe like it's going to be fine. And I've just been taught that. Or if it's like a me thing, I don't know. But anytime people bring up like, so do you have my husband was like, oh, like we should have a earthquake bag. I'm like, okay, why don't you figure that out?
Yeah, but that's adaptive and that's iterative. I mean, you are preparing because like someone in your household is like, this experience we've gone through has made me realize we need the following things. And like, I think that's an appropriate way to respond. I think, and to each their own, like I'm trying to figure out what kind of prepper I'm going to be right now. But I think that kind of constantly preparing for an event that may or may not happen is also like a really stressful way to live. And I think it's also like it's, I don't know. So you're right. There's no right way to do it. But I do think also your particular lineages also prepared you for adaptability and like, well, we'll get there when we get there because, there is some preparedness. It just might look different from someone else's.
Yeah.
There's like an emotional and a spiritual preparedness, which is also really important.
It's important. I needed you to say that. As I'm living through the apocalypse and I have unpacked my go bag, I'm like, the winds are picking up. It's just a dreadful time here.
So sorry.
This was amazing. Thank you. Everybody listening, make sure you listen to the end of today's episode to find out what our February book club pick will be. If you have not read Black Futures yet, which is Jay's book with Kimberly Drews. It is an anthology. It is talk about a book I loved. One of the books that I hold so dear to my heart. I revisit sections and passages all the time. It is both beautifully written and also a gorgeous artifact. It's like a gorgeous thing that I love so much. I know that there's a paperback that is silver, but the hardcover that I have that is black with the silver Black Futures, it is one of my favorite looking things in my home. So if you have not read this book, people, I cannot stress enough that we can never be friends until you do. Okay. That's the bottom line. If you want to be friends, you have to read Black Futures, period, the end. So you all can get that book wherever you get books. Jay, thank you so much for being here. This was a dream.
I'll come anytime. This was so fun. I love talking about books with you because we have polar opposite tastes and it makes it really fun.
It's great. Except for we agree on Station 11.
Yeah.
And everyone else, we will see you in the stacks. All right, y'all, that does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you to Jay Wortham for being our guest. And now it is time to announce our February 2025 book club pick. It is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. This book is one of the most famous and controversial novels of our time from one of the great writers of the 20th century. This 1955 novel tells the story of Humbert Humbert and his obsession and victimization of a 12-year-old girl, Dolores Hayes. We will be discussing this book on the podcast on Wednesday, February 26th. Be sure to tune in next week to find out who our guest will be. If you love this podcast and you want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack and check out my newsletter at tracythomas.substack.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please leave us a rating and a review. For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok, and check out the website at thestackspodcast.com. This episode of The Stacks was edited by Christian Duenas with production assistance from Megan Caballero. Our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tigirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.